everyone, this is Veronica Johnson with Sew It Seams, and welcome back to my studio. I had a subscriber reach out to me earlier this week asking about how I did my piecing for my Dear Jane blocks. She had the pieces of her blocks prepped and ready to sew together, but was a little confused on the best way of piecing things together. And so I wanted to do a short little video on how I do my hand piecing when I'm sewing my blocks together. Now, bits of this instruction are within different videos, but I'm going to put it all together here in one video to make it easier. I'm going to start with 2 squares, and the first part is I'm just going to be sewing these 2 squares together. The first thing we want to do for sewing our seams together is see where we're going to be stitching. I'm going to be stitching the seams right here, and I'm going to be sewing my fabric right sides together. So on the opposite side, I want to draw a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that lets me know where I'm going to be stitching. I have 2 different types of marking pens that I use. When my fabric is darker, I use this white clover marking pen. It's a little tricky in that it doesn't show up right away, but it does show after a little bit. So I'm going to draw my line here. So there is my seam allowance on that side, and that white will show up in just a moment. And then I'm going to use my pencil to draw my 1/4 inch here. And here's my 1/4 inch. And I will draw my line there. So you can see, you don't have to draw it this dark, but I'm making sure that you can see that line. Now I'm ready to pin these together. So I put my fabric right sides together. And now I'm going to pin. So I line up my fabric. My raw edges are even. I'm going to take my pin and I pin the point right into my stitching line. And then I make sure it comes through the stitching line on the back. And I pin perpendicular to my drawn line, keep it in position. And then I will pin on the other side doing the same thing. So I pin right through my line drawn there, and it comes right through my line drawn on the back side. With most of these pieces, the blocks are small enough, or the parts are small enough, where I only need a couple of pins. But you put in however many that you need. If you feel like you're going to shift, you can put more in. That's what pins are for. Use as many as you need. When I'm piecing a block or pieces of a block, I try to choose a thread that closest resembles the color of my fabric. But today, for this demonstration purpose, I want it to be able to show my stitches. So I'm going to be using this black thread. And when you're stitching, you want to thread your needle from this end, the end that comes off the spool, not from this end that is closest to the spool. That will help reduce your thread from twisting up. I don't always remember to do that, but I try to remember. To have a nice, good, clean edge to go through your needle, cut your thread at a 45-degree angle. And this will allow your thread to come through the eye of the needle much better. I don't wet the end of my thread, but if you find that your thread is having a difficult time going through the needle, then you can wet the back of your needle, of the eye of the needle. Okay, and then it comes straight through. And then I'll cut my thread. Now with my thread, I don't knot the end of it, but I'm going to start my stitch. I'm going to start my stitch not right at the end, because then your thread will start to fray. But come in a little bit, and I'm going to put my needle right down on that line. Now my fabric has been pinned so it'll stay in position, but I still want to check to make sure that it's lining up. But this is shifted just a little bit, so I'm just going to do that again. There, now I'm right on the white. And I make just a small stitch here. And then I pull my thread through, but leave a tail. You want to leave enough of a tail there. And then we're going to come back right through where you first went through. So come through the first hole. And then I'm going to come up just past that. So I'm going to move that needle out of the way, or that pin out of the way. So I've come up just past that so that there is a stitch there. What that does is that anchors the stitch. That's a back stitch and it anchors it. Now I can do what's called a running stitch. And that is basically, I'm just going to go down and up through my fabric. So I'm coming down and then coming up. And I just kind of rock my needle up and down through this line of stitch. And I'll take 3 or 4 stitches. And after, 3 or 4 stitches, then I will actually do a back stitch just midway through the stitching line. And what that does is that anchors it right in the middle of my stitching, just to help keep it together. I'm going to continue with my running stitch. Almost to the end here. Keep going right on the other side of that pin. I'm going to move that pin out of the way. And then on the end here, I'm going to do another back stitch, just like I did at the front. So I back up, and I've anchored that stitch. Sometimes, if I feel like I'm a little far, I might do one more. Done that back stitch. Now I cut my thread. And there is my basic piecing. It's followed along here, and it's coming right along there. The smaller your stitches are, the firmer your seam will be. And then just like in anything, when you're opening it and you're pressing, you want to press your seams toward the dark. So then I would open that up and press it to the dark. Now, what if you have already prepared your pieces and you have the templates glued onto the back and they are ready to be sewn together? How would you handle that? So I would basically do the same thing, only instead of a line that I'm following the paper pieces that are on there. So once again, right sides together because I want to sew those two together. I'm going to line them up. Now this time what I'm going to be doing is lining them up with starting at the point. So I know right here is the point of this fabric, and I'm right above where that paper is. And then I'm going to come out with my pin on the other one right at the point opposite. Okay, so they are both lined together, and I will move my fabric. So I have this point matched up, and I put my pin down. So my points, you can see the pin is going through that very corner, and I'm going to do the same thing on this one. I do the same method when I'm doing paper piecing also. So I go through the point here, and I'm right at the point on the other side, and I go through the fabric. So that is pinned down. Now sometimes when I have these paper templates, I just want to make sure in the middle that I'm lined up. So I've got my pin right at the edge of the paper, and I put my pin right here at this edge. Okay, and then I'm just going to follow my template for sewing. So once again, I've got my thread and I've got my needle here, so I'm going to begin stitching. This is where the edge of my stitching really matters. I need to have that locked in, so I come out just a little from that. I start my thread and I come up right at that point. I'm going to remove the pin so it's out of the way. Once again, leaving a tail, and I'm going to come back into that same hole and then come up just beyond where my thread came through for the last time. And I've anchored that stitch. See, I can even, I'm pulling on my thread here and it's not going to pull through. And now I begin my running stitch right along the edge of that paper template. Do a few stitches. When you're doing your running stitch, make sure you don't pull it too tight, because then you'll start to gather your fabric. You don't want to gather it. I need to remove my pin because it's right where I need to put my needle. And I'm going to do my back stitch to anchor that. And I just feel safer doing one more little back stitch. And there is that seam. Now I have those sewn together. Now I've opened this up, and once again you're going to press toward the dark. And here is another piece. They're sewn together. With both of these samples here, you can see that they sewed together really well. Both of them have been pressed to the other side. And now if I'm going to be sewing two pieces together that have the seams and we need to nestle up those seams, we're going to do basically the same thing, only I will start pinning them differently. Now these are just scrap fabric, so don't mind that they're going to be facing the other way. Once again, since I have paper here, I could just use this as my guide for my seam allowance, so I don't need to worry about that. But on the ones where I don't have a template, I do want to draw the seam allowance. So just like I did with the individual units, I'm going to draw my 1/4 inch seam allowance onto this fabric. All right, so my 1/4 inch seam allowance is drawn on this side, and I'm going to use this side. So we want to have them sewn together this way. Our seams are going opposite, so they'll butt up to each other. So we're going to pin these together. I actually find it a little bit easier to sew from the fabric side than I do from the paper side. But I want to start right in the middle here where my seams are to line those up. So when I do mine, I pin mine right in the center point here where they butt up together. And then I want my pin to come through on the other side. Oops, I'm struggling just a little bit. Just a minute. I'm going to have my pin come right through the center, and then it's coming right out of the corner here. And you'll see it'll come right through there, and it lines up really nicely. So I have my center lined up. It's pinned right in position, because that center part where those joints meet is really important. That's where you're going to see it the most. Then I do the same thing over here, put my pin through and my pin through there. And then I put my pin on the other end. Put it through this line, and it's right above my paper on this line. Okay, so now I have my pins going through, keeps it from shifting, and I'm going to do the same thing of stitching. So once again, starting at the bottom, starting at the end, leaving a tail, making that anchor stitch. And then I'll do a running stitch. Okay. And then I'm coming right to the center here. So this can get a little tricky because you're coming through multiple layers. So I can't always just sew from the top like I have been doing and rocking my needle through. Just with the thickness, I have to go down and then I come up right on either side of that pin. I'm going to remove the pin, and right here I'm going to do a back stitch to anchor it right over where those seams meet. And then I bring it up right past that. There we go. And now I can finish my running stitch. Now my thread is running out, so I need to replenish. So I do a back stitch right in there. Don't worry about that thread tail. And even just in the middle of this seam, I'm going to do the same thing like I did at the beginning. Leave a little bit of a tail, back stitch, anchor that, and then continue. Come right to the end. I'll remove that pin. Now I can do a back stitch. And we're done. This tail's a little long, so I'm just going to cut it there. Then there we have this sewn together, and you can see it matches up almost perfectly there. I'm going to give this a quick press. And that's how I hand piece the basic pieces together when I'm doing my Dear Jane quilts. I hope this little walkthrough of how I do hand piecing is helpful for you in doing some hand piecing on your own blocks. If you need any clarification on other methods or other types of sewing that happen in the Dear Jane blocks, go ahead and send me an email at sewitseamscreations@outlook.com, or you can leave a comment down below. This is Veronica Johnson with Sew It Seams, and remember, keep stitching.